Meeting is being live streamed. Give it consent. Okay, great. Let's jump in. Oh, let me mute our. Okay. And almost. Apologies, friends. All right, we're back. Okay, so my name is Carlos Burgos. I am incredibly excited to see a round 2 of this inaugural series. This speaker series, President Johnson will share more in a few, but I just want to welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. I am managing things in the back, so I won't be here for long, but I'll be here in the background. Anyway, so a little bit about Guttman, as many of you know, because I see many Guttman names in our group, but we're live streaming on YouTube and we're recording for the future. So folks who aren't as intimately involved and maybe folks who jump in will love to hear this. We are one of the newest 2-year colleges to be established in City University of New York. The college is a designated HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, and Minority Serving Institution, MSI. So since its inaugural class in 2012, the college faculty and staff have committed to fostering truly an equitably rigorous academic ecosystem. So the model requires students to enroll full-time as a cohort and participate in robust weekly programming with faculty, student success advocates, and peer mentors. And so we call that the first year experience. And then students move on into their major in the second year. So our students come from all the boroughs and even a few pockets outside of the boroughs in New York. And a significant number of our students are first generation college students and or from underserved communities and neighborhoods. So the college has a stellar reputation for all sorts of things and has been peer-reviewed, sort of shown up in peer-reviewed journals and presentations for graduation rates of 40% or higher, which greatly surpasses local and national 2-year completion rates, which is around 14 and 20%. So as a result of this, the college has received honors galore. We like to talk about Niche's honors, niche.com. They have noted that we are one of the best community colleges in New York City in 2020. And so we take great pride in this recognition, and we look forward to bolstering that recognition and continuing to, of course, focus on student success. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Johnson to talk a little bit about what this particular series is aiming to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carlos, and thank you to everyone that is here. If you would just share, as we are beginning this next series of our conversations with Assemblymember Kim, that will be greatly appreciated. So as I thought about the speaker series and being new to New York, it served a number of purposes for me to get to know some of the outstanding leaders throughout New York City, throughout the state of New York, but it's also an opportunity for our students, our faculty, and our staff to be acclimated with many of the leaders who are leaders and I would say shakers in the community, and also to allow the speakers to also be more acclimated to the great work that we're doing here at Guttman Community College. So it is such a pleasure to welcome Assemblymember Ron Kim with us, and I look forward to the conversation that will take place.
And I get to jump in and introduce Assemblymember Ron Kim, which I'm also really excited to meet and bring onto campus virtually for now. And so I'll move on to, I'm hearing some background noise. Anyway, so Ron Kim, a longtime resident of Flushing, Queens, was reelected to his 3rd term as representative of the 40th Assembly District in November 2016. He's the first and only Korean American ever elected to the New York State Legislature. After spending his adult life in public service, Ron is committed to delivering real results for the community he's called home since age of 7. So Ron began his career in public service and then Councilmember John C. Liu's office, focusing on the quality of life issues in his beloved downtown Flushing community. He then moved on to become an aide to then State Assemblyman Mark Weprin, After working in Assemblyman Weprin's office, Ron joined the New York City Department of Buildings, followed by the Department of Small Business Services. So in 2004, he was accepted into the National Urban Fellows Program, advising the Chief Education Office of the Chicago Public Schools, while simultaneously earning his master's degree in public administration from Baruch. Many of our students go to Baruch after Guttman. And so in 2006, Ron joined the staff of New York City Council Speaker Christine Quinn as a policy analyst, writing and examining legislation on issues related to transportation, infrastructure, and economic development. From 2007 to 2010, Ron served as a regional director for government and community affairs in the administrations of governors Elliot Spitzer and David A. Patterson, where he collaborated and worked with a varied group of state agencies, elected officials, and community organizations. So after leaving the governor's office, he worked as a legislative advocate for children with special needs, small businesses, and vulnerable New Yorkers. Since his election in 2012, Ron has stood firm in his message of striving to provide quality education for all students, securing funding for local schools, and supporting small businesses in Flushing. He sponsored numerous bills, including A7642, which seeks to raise the age of criminal responsibility for certain crimes, A8050, which would amend civil service law in relation to implementing a Minority Employment Act within New York State, and A6530, which seeks to secure equal access to health and human services for limited English-speaking individuals. So in his first term, Ron made national and international news by mediating an issue between local businesses and senior citizens in the community, seeking a social space in Flushing's crowded neighborhood. In response, he wrote and introduced the Community Corners Cafe Fund, a legislation that sought to grant tax credit to cafes, restaurants, and diners that collaborate with local nonprofits and serve and provide services to older adults. So in his second term, Ron made national news once again by working with Governor Cuomo to implement long-term resolutions to regulate and reform the nail salon industry in New York City. The New York legislation and accompanying initiatives the new legislation and accompanying initiatives would secure safer working conditions for employees of over 4,000 small businesses across the country, so massive impact. As a tireless advocate for the diverse needs of his multicultural district, Assemblyman Kim also collaborated with Mayor de Blasio, Congresswoman Mang, and State Senator Squadron to write and submit legislation establishing the Asian Lunar New Year as a New York City school holiday. So in June 2015, Mayor de Blasio publicly announced that the Asian Lunar New Year would be designated as an official New York City school holiday. In Albany, Ron has continued to be an active advocate for his community and currently sits on the following committees: education, health, social services, government operations, housing, corporations, authorities, and commissions. He's a member of the Black, Puerto Rican, and Asian Legislative Caucus. In April 2015, he was appointed as the chair of the Task Force on New Americans. In January 2017, he was appointed as the secretary of Majority Conference. Raised in Flushing, Queens, Ron graduated from Riverdale Country Day School in 1997, where he was captain of the football and basketball teams. He earned his BA from Hamilton College and an MPA from Baruch. Ron lives in Flushing with his wife and his two daughters, Olive and Hazel. And I'm sure I can say more. I'm excited to hear Ron make more sense of that, and I'll hand it off and disappear for a little bit in the background.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carlos. Welcome, Assemblymember Kim. It is such a pleasure and an honor to get a chance to speak with you again. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for having me on.
Absolutely. And, I want to jump right into it here. There's always pressure around being the first. And talk to me a little bit about that, about being the first. What type of weight do you feel was on your shoulders about being the first?
Sure. When I was elected almost 10 years ago to the State Assembly, I was at that time the first and only Korean American to be elected. At that time, I was the only Asian American in a body of 213 elected officials in Albany. Since then, we've had a number of other Asian electeds that had advanced into the state Senate and the state assembly. But at the time, there was a lot of pressure and weight because what I discovered is when you're the first of anything, especially around race in politics, the system and the institution will bring you in to really celebrate and sometimes utilize and leverage your racial identity to, to maintain the status quo. That's what we often refer to as racial identity politics. And it was very hard for me to overcome that hump in my first few years in office. Like, I had a lot of access because as a Democratic, progressive to liberal establishment, there was a yearning to celebrate having diversity and having inclusion. But I soon realized that there were some predatory systemic failures where just because you're included and just because you're part of diversity doesn't mean that you're actually helping the very folks that got you elected. You're not achieving the racial and economic justice that you had promised to fight for just because you have a seat at the table. So that's kind of where I am in my journey as the first Korean American, where I try not to talk about as much of the racial element and try to win policies on the merits of the issues that help all minorities and all people from different backgrounds.
That's great. And as you think about being the first and you articulated, some of, what you experienced, we all have people in our lives who have contributed to our success. So when you think about your personal and your professional development and you take that introspective look, who would you say were probably the most influential to helping you to become the person you are today?
I've had, fortunately, a number of mentors that I looked up to as a child, as a teenager, and as a professional. But, as a 42-year-old, and by the way, that bio was a little outdated. I actually have 3 young daughters, and I've grown my family. But going back and trying to connect these dots, I realized some of the most influential people in my life were my closest friends in college, in high school, especially friends who I looked up to. There were people of high character that I deemed that had high character, and I wanted to do the same type of courageous things that my friends were doing. Even back then, it could be the most mundane things in social settings, in a classroom where they stood up to a bully, right? Where they come from a more privileged place, but they were able to say no to people who were being abusive in a locker room or in a classroom. And I always looked at friends like that and said, there's something inherently good and decent about him or her that I need to learn from. And as a middle-aged adult, I realized that going back of the tremendous and indelible impact those individuals had shaping my values and my character and the man that I still strive to be today as a father and a lawmaker.
That's amazing. And when I think about our theme today, strength, courage, and resilience in the 21st century, tell us a little bit more about your journey to public service.
My journey was based on fighting for my community's right to economic opportunities, jobs, and part of the American experience. I represent a predominantly immigrant community. We have 124 different languages spoken in my district, deemed as one of the most diverse places on the planet. And when I came here as an immigrant, as a son of of Korean American immigrants who came here and opened up a mom and pop store in Upper Manhattan. I saw as the only child of immigrants how difficult it was for them, and as well as small business owners, to try to survive in a cutthroat city like New York. And after 10 years of moving here, I saw my parents file for bankruptcy, and go through some of the worst financial distress, that I've seen. And as a young person, uh, in my teenage and early 20s, I often find myself being very upset at my family. And I've individualized that trauma and pain to blame my parents. Well, maybe if you worked hard enough, maybe because you didn't speak English well enough, right? As a teenager, you have these sentiments, especially because you're going through so much pain. But as I grew up, went to college, and I learned about the system of how things work, I realized that as a society, we let people down by not giving them the proper access and economic opportunities for hardworking minorities, women, and immigrants in our society. For the last 40 years, our policies have gone the other direction, only subsidizing the growth of some of the biggest corporations while not improving the social and economic conditions. So the next generation of students like at Guttman could have real chance at success, and not worry about what they'll do if one thing doesn't lead to another. There was a time you could take risks and you could do entrepreneurial things and you could pursue your passions without the fear of failing. But these days, when I look at young adults, immigrants, and from marginalized communities, they have so much of a fear to fail because they realize they may not have another opportunity if they have a setback. And that's not right. And that's what drives me as a public servant, to make sure that we can provide space that as young people, you could fail and you could have setbacks, but we can create the opportunities for you to bounce back.
Right. I love that. And, you point out, the work of higher education, specifically community colleges, where we prepare students to really make the decision whether they desire to move to a four-year college or university or go directly into a career. And that is that entrepreneurial thinking that we're looking to foster. As I thought about, our last, I would say almost 2 years, unprecedented times, at least in our lifetime, and we think about the novel coronavirus and so many of the injustices, racial, economic, that we've seen in communities of color have been disproportionately impacted. I reflect back on how there were countless cases of Asian Americans who were the targets of hate crimes. Just tell us a little, how did you cope with that moment, and what messages did you share with close friends and family members that would give them hope?
I'm still dealing with this as we speak, because every time we turn on the TV or social media, we're constantly seeing Asian seniors and Asian women being attacked in subways. And just over the weekend, just nearby in Jackson Heights, there was an attack, a potential hate crime. And it's extremely demoralizing and sad to go through it, because we've seen the predictors early on of COVID. When we have these social, health, or economic meltdowns or setbacks in working class and immigrant communities, where we do not have the security like the wealthiest class in New York, to have the resilience to say, hey, we can go on our second home and in the Hamptons and just isolate from it all until this goes away. We don't have that luxury as working people. Like, you still have to go in, put your time in, get on the subway, put a mask on, and do the work, go to class, because we can't afford to lose that opportunity. And in such a competitive, cutthroat environment, if government is not doing enough, this is at the beginning of the pandemic, to give people some chance at recovery, by making sure that we have enough money in our pockets, that we have enough public benefits, that we can, for example, during this time period, why not make transportation free for students that are in community colleges? There's small things that we could have done better that would have de-stressed our communities. But when you do not provide that kind of economic relief, and people are feeling hopeless, and they're constantly being pitted against each other. And unfortunately, in this country, whenever we had these downturns, Asians and Asian Americans have consistently been targets going back many, many decades. And that's something that, as our community, Asian American community, we need to have real and honest conversations with other communities and have seize this opportunity to have inter-community development dialogues and be realigned, because we shouldn't be pitted against each other. The people who actually control the economy and have all the power, they want us to fight each other. They want us to target each other, because that's how you manage the injustice and inequality that everyone suffers from. So I've tried my best to go back to my community and create safe space where we can go and have some on the ground conversations about what's going on culturally, and subculture in our cities, where Asians have become the easy target for people's anger and frustration. And how do we overcome that? It's not going to be overnight. It's going to take long and many different type of conversations and community events to foster trust again. Because right now, at this rate, if we do not get ahead of this, I think things may only get worse, and we definitely do not want to be in that direction.
Right, and I like your comment about really having the conversation. Just being honest about what is the state of where we are in America, and then also how cultures are impacted. And that's what I really love about the work that we're doing at Guttman, is that we're really focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion, but now we're focusing on a sense of belonging. What does it mean to belong to an ethnic group, or a group where the sexual orientation may be different than what heteronormative society proposes? So I love that you pointed out that just having the real conversation is critically important. So I have a question here from one of our students, and our students are here, and I'm glad that they're participating. And one of the students asked, this is our SGA president, Bashir, and his question is, how do you know that, or how do you get the feeling that your constituents are being served to the best of your abilities? What are some of those indicators?
There's a number of things that we measure to see whether their needs are being met. Every day before COVID, our district office here in Flushing, we had anywhere between 40 to 60 constituents that would walk in with simple to very complex problems. But we used to keep a consistent record of what the top issues were that people were facing. And every year, it was inevitably housing needs, and particularly senior housing needs. We have a tremendous housing crisis in places like New York City and across the country, where whenever we have any kind of affordable housing that goes up, there is a line that goes back blocks and blocks and blocks of people applying. So for example, when last time we had a unit that opened up for 125 units at below market affordable housing rates, there was about 50 to 60,000 people who applied for those units in New York City. This is a full-blown crisis, and that's why we are doing whatever we can, especially during this type of COVID crisis, to make sure that people are not just being thrown out of their apartments, they're not being evicted, that we're giving them opportunities to recover, and we're giving them as many chances through subsidized programs to get back on their feet. Because if we do not take care of working people, if we do not take care of the students that are in Guttman and making sure that they also have a pipeline to continue in their careers or to another college, there is no economy. There is no economy. And people always talk about rich people living in New York City. Well, we can't tax them because they're going to leave and they're going to flee New York. But guess what? If we do not take care of working people, there is no economy, and no one wants to have conversations about that. They always talk about the billionaires leaving New York City. That's not what I fear. What I fear the most is that we don't have opportunities for working people, especially young adults, to be part of this economy.
I like that. And that, again, that's the great work that community colleges provide, to the city, to the state, is that we are meeting with industry partners to understand what the needs are so that we can ensure that our students have access. So we certainly appreciate that your advocacy toward that work. So very similar to, the question that Bashir asked, if students are interested in public office, what advice do you give those students who aspire for elected positions?
I would say find purpose, what I call intrinsic motivation and intrinsic drive to serve. Most people in my early days of politics enter public service because of their vanity, and they feel they want popularity, they want fame, they like the nice pin on their jackets, and they want to be famous, or they want to be the next big star. But those are all what I label as extrinsic motivators. Public service is about finding issues and finding local community issues that you feel passionate about resolving, and confronting. And sometimes it could be an economic or social injustice issue that you feel passionate about resolving. But I think that's the first step to enter public service or politics. You need to understand what it is that you feel passionate about and what it is that you feel purposeful about. And that advice actually applies to anything that students want to do. If you want to succeed in whatever industry, as you alluded, that has opportunities, or in politics, you need to understand what is the purpose behind your work. And this is the time to explore that. As young adults, or young professionals at Guttman, this is the time to reach out to your local electeds. If you want to get into politics, this is the time to have uncomfortable conversations. Call your council members, call your senators, call other elected officials, and bring to them some issues that you care about and see what they have to say. Part of the challenge of getting into public service is taking that first leap and first step toward being in an uncomfortable place where you may have to break out of your shell to present yourself. And that involves public speaking, that involves presentation, but you need to start somewhere. And as long as you can overcome that fear, the future is limitless in what you can achieve.
I love that. And really, I think that dovetails well to you finding your passion and your purpose when you really advocated for what I think is one of the most impressive bills, and that's the Assembly Bill, formerly A7221, which is now 3102, an act requiring the Board of Trustees at the State University of New York and the City University of New York to conduct a joint study and report on the availability and accessibility of alternative, high quality, low-cost resources in lieu of traditional textbooks. So building upon finding your passion and your purpose, how did this even get on your radar?
As a longstanding member of the education committee, I've served on that committee for almost 8.5 years now. I've always been collaborating with my counterparts, like your Dr. Johnson and others that do this for a living, and constantly try to shape academic policies that will serve students better and meet them where the needs are. And I think this crisis of COVID is a clear example where we're not entirely meeting the students because our policies and our funding are not aligned, even though you know what we need to do in terms of making sure that we have digital access. Some students may not have computers, all those things that need to be resolved. The policymakers seem to be a couple of steps behind. So I think moving forward, like we need to constantly communicate, especially when we have these type of setbacks and emergencies, to make sure that we don't lose the opportunities and we don't lose any generations because of natural catastrophes like COVID.
So when you think about, this this phenomena, if you will, in terms of COVID and how it has caused us to think differently about higher education, and you think about even meetings, meetings have now been, they're more Zoom focused, and we've had to come out of our comfort of being in the same location. When you think about that, do you believe that higher education can return back to what we once called normal?
Yeah, the brick and mortar of higher education, even before COVID, as you know, had been challenged through a lot of online courses and universities that have popped up and access to classrooms through digitalized formats. But I think there has to be a mixed approach, because even if I feel very grateful to be in this space, but 80% of communication is through body language and through one-on-one interaction. So it is entirely different when I'm giving my speech, my remarks in person in front of students and faculty versus what I'm doing now virtually. There's a lot of things that you can't read based on my language and how I communicate certain points. And it's critically important. And I say this is important because we live in an era unlike any other era before, where young people are consumed with so much information from the moment they wake up. I don't know about you, but I never had, I was a Generation X, meaning I didn't have my email address until I was a sophomore in college. We didn't have smartphones, we didn't have iPhones. There was no digital picture of anything that we did in high school and college. And as a result, we were able to be in the moment with students, with my peers, and teachers and professors. There was no distraction. When I was focused, when I felt passionate, it didn't require that much to lower my filters to pay attention. But nowadays, I would say try to keep a teenager student attention for more than 30 seconds. It is hard. They're gonna get a text, they're gonna get something, they're looking at their phone. So much information is coming to them. So I think it's more important that we provide space when they can put the phones down and they can be in front of a teacher where they can focus and lower their filters and retain valuable information that can shape their values and outlook in life.
I love it. Certainly, we're focused on, post-pandemic. What does engaging, the student, the different learning modalities? So certainly spot on there. So as we think about, you've made headlines, as Carlos mentioned earlier, and you've done some amazing work. So what are you working on these days that might be of interest to our audience today?
Well, so as a chair of the Committee on Aging, which sees older adults in senior care for the entire state of New York, we've taken on some very tough fights this past year, most notably taking on former Governor Andrew Cuomo and his policies around nursing homes and older adults. We saw last year how many of his policies were flawed, and our office called him out very early on when he was at the peak of his popularity. It wasn't an easy fight, where a lot of people told me to stand down. He's too popular, he's too powerful, you're gonna get hurt, you shouldn't say anything. But I made promises, going back to our student earlier to my constituents that when I was on the ground last year at the peak of the pandemic, we've had constituents whose loved ones are dying in these facilities and they couldn't get access, they couldn't get any answers. And the governor's people were not in tune and they were too busy, even back then, covering up the truth of what was going on the ground. And it wasn't right. Because now we know while this was happening, the governor's people were consumed with chasing down a multi-million-dollar book deal for his own personal profits. While our people on the ground could not get tested, could not have access to hospitals, we were scared, and many people died unnecessarily because we couldn't communicate the truth in real time. So this fight helped really redefine what care should and must look like moving forward in New York State and other places. We are the wealthiest state in the nation. By far, our concentrated wealth outpaces other areas in the country. There's no excuse why we can't do better in taking care of our older adults, especially people who are vulnerable and who are isolated. We have the money and wealth to do that. And so my job and my challenge now moving forward is to put in short-term and long-term fixes toward a caring, what I call a caring economy, where we can pay better for people who enter the care sector, people who work as nurses, people who work in the home care industry, people who are doing childcare work. These are the real, this is the backbone of our economy, and these workers are barely making $14, $15 an hour. We have it reversed. Like we are trusting these workers to take care of our people who we love the most, but we're refusing to pay them for that valuable service. So we have a lot of work to do, but with the current federal administration, with the new budget that was Build Back Better budget, there's a ton of funding there to make the caring sector more robust and more just. So I look forward to that money coming to New York, and I look forward to us getting the system right moving forward.
As I heard you talk about your passion for the aging community, I thought about Congressman Lewis, and so he talks about in the past getting in good trouble. And it sounds like this is the good trouble. And I certainly thank you for the work that you've done and the work that you will continue to do. So my last question is this. As you think about all the work that you've done, the bills that you helped to co-author or author, how does it feel to know that you are impacting the lives of so many current and future residents of New York City and New York State?
I feel a tremendous sense of responsibility and a duty to put our state and our community first. And it is a constant and daunting challenge. I wake up and go to sleep having these thoughts constantly about what I need to do better and what I need, where I fell short today, and what I need to focus on tomorrow to meet the demands of the public. And it is tough. It is tough because, as being part of a relatively new community college, and it's a rare thing, by the way, for Guttman to exist, because we have divested in our public colleges and community colleges for decades. So to have Guttman, in where we are now, and to succeed, hopefully will signal to my colleagues that we need to do more. We need to expand on the Guttman model. We need to create more community colleges, sister colleges that replicate what you're doing throughout the state, because this is the public capital that we desperately needed for so many decades. But we've been so consumed by just privatizing everything, thinking all we have to do as lawmakers is to bring in the private sector to fix our social problems. And the private colleges are not even near meeting the needs of the next generation of leaders. And I wholeheartedly believe part of that solution has to be public institutions like Guttman and other public universities that have to be fully funded, and compete at a level that surpasses the private institutions. So our next generation feels like they can go to Guttman, they can go to other public colleges and have world-class education professors who are well paid, and can compete graduating from there from the private institutions that claim to have better education, which I don't think they do.
Awesome. Well, Assemblymember Kim, certainly I thank you today for your candor, certainly for your passion for the work that you do. And I know I speak for all of, I would say, the Grizzlies, our mascot. Thank you so much for your energy and your passion for this work, and certainly your time commitment. We do, at some point in time, want you to be on campus so you can see all the great work that's happening with our faculty, our staff, and our students. Everyone, again, please join me in thanking, giving a virtual applause for our great Assembly member, Ron Kim. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to engaging with you and again in the future. Everyone that's watching, be on the lookout for a spring series of the President Speaker Series with some more exciting and innovative guests. Thank you all for attending. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.